Good morning, fourth graders. Today in math, we are comparing two fractions using either greater than, less than, or the equal to symbol. Today's math is going to be a little bit trickier though, because if you take a look at the problems on this first page, you'll notice that the fractions that you're comparing have different denominators or different bottom numbers. I'm going to show you two different strategies that you could use to solve the problems today, and then you can choose which one works best for you. So let's take a look at this first problem. Our first problem asks us to compare if 2/3 or 2/4 is greater, or if the two fractions are equal to one another. The first strategy that you could do is you could rewrite these two fractions as equivalent fractions that have the same denominator. We did this a little while ago, so let me refresh your memory on how we did this. If I wanted to turn these two fractions into an equivalent fraction where they both have the same bottom number, one strategy that I could do is I could multiply the two denominators together. So 3 times 4 equals 12. So my new denominator for both of these fractions would be 12. And then all I need to do is turn them each into an equivalent fraction, so then I can easily compare them because they already have the same denominator. So for example, on the left fraction of 2/3, I'm going to ask myself, how did I turn 3 into 12? I multiplied it by 4. Whatever you do to the bottom, you have to do to the top. So over here, I'm going to multiply my 2 times 4, and that's going to make an equivalent fraction of 8/12. So 8/12 and 2/3 are equivalent fractions. On the opposite side, where I had 2/4, I turned 4 into 12 by multiplying it by 3. Again, whatever I do to the bottom, I'm going to do to the top. So 2 times 3 is 6. Now, it's going to be much easier to compare 8/12 and 6/12 because they have the same denominator. And I know that 8 is greater than 6, so 8/12 is greater than 6/12. So that's one strategy you could use to solve your math today. A second strategy you could use is if you look over on the sidebar, the 5th page that I've given you is a set of fractions, and all of these are just a fraction bar that are equal to one whole, but they're broken into equal parts of different fractions. So for example, this second bar right here is broken into 2 halves that equal one whole. So what you could do if you didn't like the first strategy that I showed you is you could shade in the first fraction of 2/3 and the second fraction of 2/4 to compare and see which one was larger than the other. So I'm going to remember 2/3 and 2/4. I'm going to go back to this page. I'm going to go to the bar that's broken into thirds, and I'm going to shade in 2/3. Then I'm going to go to the bar that's broken into fourths, and I'm going to shade in 2/4. And you can see now that I've shaded these in, 2/3 is larger than 2/4. There is more shaded in. So I know that 2/3 is greater than 2/4. And that is also the same answer that we got when we found equivalent fractions. So both of these strategies gave us the same answer, but one we had to do multiplication, and the other strategy we got to shade in using our fraction bar. If you choose to use the fraction bar, I definitely recommend erasing your work each time so that you don't get confused when you move on to the next problem. Go ahead, pause the video now, choose which strategy you prefer, and try and solve the next few problems, and then come on back and we'll go over the answers together. Okay, so depending on which strategy you chose to use, your answer should still be the same as mine, but the way you got there might be a little bit different. So on this second problem, for comparing 5/12 and 3/10, I'm going to go to my fraction bar. I'm going to shade in 5/12 and 3/10, and I can see that 5/12 is worth more than 3/10 is. 5/12 is greater than 3/10. The next problem, 6/10 and 8/12. 6/10 8/12. I can see that 8/12 is worth a little bit more than 6/10, so 6/10 is less than 8/12. The next problem, 10/100 or 5/10. On this problem, I actually think it'll be a little bit quicker for me to just find equivalent fractions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply 5/10 by 10, because I know that 10 times 10 equals 100, and that would give me the same denominator for both of my problems. Then whatever I do to the bottom, I need to do to the top. 5 times 10 is equal to 50. So now I can compare 10/100 and 50/100, and I can clearly see that 10/100 is less than 50/100. In fact, 50/100 is equal to 1/2. All right, on to the next page. On page 2, I'm comparing 1/2 and 4/8. And just by looking at this problem, I don't need to use either of my strategies, because I know that 4/8 is equal to 1/2, because 4 is half of 8. So these two fractions are equivalent to one another. On my next problem, 2/3 and 3/8. I think I'm going to shade these problems in. So I have 2/3 and 3/8. By comparing these two fractions, I can see that 2/3 more is shaded in than on 3/8, so 2/3 is the larger fraction. So 2/3 is greater than 3/8. The next problem, I have 4/8 and I have 2/6. So when I go to shade these in, I can see that 4/8 is greater than 2/6. On the next problem, 2/5 and 4/12. 2/5 and 4/12. Whoa, those are really close to each other. But it looks as though 2/5 is just a little bit more than 4/12. So 2/5 is greater than 4/12. On page 3, we're comparing 1/2 and we're comparing 2/6. So I have 1/2 and I have 2/6, and 1/2 is definitely greater than 2/6. The next problem, 4/12 and 3/8. Shaded in my 4/12 and my 3/8, and I can see 3/8 is just a little bit more than 4/12. So 4/12 is less than 3/8. On the next question, 5/10 and 4/6. I can see that 4/6 is greater than 5/10. So 5/10 is less than 4/6. The next question, I have 3/6 and 1/3. Three-sixths is greater than 1/3. On to the last page, I have 1/2 and 3/5. 3/5 is slightly greater than 1/2. So 1/2 is less than 3/5. The next question, I have 2/5 and 4/12. 2/5 is greater than 4/12. Next, 3/5 and 2/6. 3/5 is greater than 2/6. And last but not least, 1/3 and 3/5. And I can see 1/3 is less than 3/5. All right, I hope that went well for you today. Depending on whichever strategy you chose, you should have still gotten the same answers as I did. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out and have a great day.